and the rent is too low.
A somewhat comical piece by Financial Times. Increasingly, they're having to turn to humour to actually describe what the economy is doing. They write, in case you've already forgotten, the latest Bank of England monetary policy said the committee was continuing to monitor closely the impact of the bank rate increases so far. The committee also recognised that it become more important to consider the developments in the rental market. The Times, Financial Times comments, this last sentence reads a little bit like, and someone should probably check out what that screaming sound coming from the basement is. But it's fairly important. So they're highlighting there that, the rental market is starting to come into some focus at long last from the Bank of England. The FT goes on and looks at the reason that the bank interest rates are not having the impact on the economy that they'd hoped, partly because the amount of floating rate mortgages is hugely reduced. It was 70% and it's now less than 20% of all mortgages are floating, and most are now fixed over a certain number of years, be it 2, 3, 4, or 5. And the FT comments, quoting Shafrick and Kennedy, in public and media discourse, mortgage holders tend to attract more comment and attention than private renters. Yet just under 20% of all households are now in the private rental sector. The transmission mechanism here would, to our minds, be more indirect in the case of mortgages, as the ability of landlords to pass on increased costs will be limited by the setting of rents in the rental market. So they're highlighting here that the tools that the Bank of England has to control the economy, wisely guide us all through the troubled times, a lot of these levers are not actually connected to anything, and they are finding themselves struggling to influence the economy in the way they would choose.
Well, not certain they were ever able to influence the economy in the way that they would choose. They've certainly influenced it pretty negatively by the printing presses, as we've covered many times. And that brings us on to the Resolution Foundation, who have been pushing, they've published a new report, but they've been pushing this out today on Twitter. I just wanted to highlight a couple of tweets from them. So what does this mean? Wealth falls from a peak of 840% of GDP in Q1 2021 to 650% of GDP in Q1 2023. That is a £2.1 trillion fall in cash terms, the biggest fall in household wealth since the Second World War. And so they have shown a graph in this tweet which shows that very nicely. But that is quite a spectacular statistic, David.
It certainly is. I mean, it's huge. And what is it? That's a bubble popping, right? We've had zero interest rates for years, and this has created a giant bubble in more or less everything. And these things cannot be sustained. Eventually, inflation starts to run away. They start to put up interest rates and everything tanks. Now, the 2.1 trillion wasn't real. It was a paper profit on things like house values and stock values and bond values. And all of these asset classes are now falling, and people are realizing that the wealth they thought they had, they didn't. It was a paper value that was only held up by zero interest rates and easy money. And when that goes away, as it must, the reality reasserts itself.
And then they said this, because this during the presentation when they launched the report this morning, they said, or they asked, what's the biggest problem with rising interest rates? And they say that rising cost of government debt is an even bigger problem than the rising cost of people's mortgages. As the second problem affects less than 1 in 3 households, whereas everyone is affected by the first problem. So they are particularly concerned about that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that very, very briefly.
Well, government debt is huge. It's going to become increasingly unaffordable. It already is in the United States. It's going to go that way rapidly here as well. And the other thing that they were saying is that, well, look, there's some positives here, because the affordability of houses will get better. Rather than being 8.9 times loan to value ratio, loan to salary ratio, it'll come down to 5.6 times price to earnings ratio. Right now, when I was young, it was 3. Right, so it's still not particularly affordable. But what that implies is that the people who bought houses and have mortgages that they've purchased in the last 10 years, they're all going to be wiped out. Right?
Yes.
That's catastrophic for the housing market. And they don't really go into that issue.
Well, this would be a reset of the housing market, wouldn't it? And but anyway, that means that the baby boomer generation has done extremely well out of this whole situation. The next generation is going to do fairly well out of it because house prices are going to be at a level that perhaps are more affordable. But in the meantime, you've got this big 30 or 40-year difference where, in fact, people, as you say, are going to be put out of business completely and completely bankrupted. Well, we'll see how that works out in the end. Now, look, we've got to move on. So I want to say, if you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There's plenty to there are opportunities to help us out there, and it'll be very much appreciated. You could pick something up at the UK Column shop, but please do share material you find on the various platforms, especially ukcolumn.org. So let's just look at a couple of the things on there. Following on from Friday's report from Vanessa on the BBC, and them apparently featuring terrorists in their documentaries. I've just put up a short article on this today. We'd like that very much shared, and we'd very much like the BBC to be asked some questions about this. So please get onto that. Now, the online safety bill is back in the House of Lords tomorrow for another session. And so we want to highlight this section on the UK Column website, ukcolumn.org/censored, which brings us basically up to date from the beginning of this whole program to limit freedom of speech on the internet and otherwise. So if you have a look at that and share that one as well. And then finally, an article from Mark. 2 seconds on this, Mark.
Yeah, this is a comprehensive article of the Texas Independent Convention. The challenge to the duopoly, the Democratic-Republican dominance, that was the main theme that I covered in early April. A very comprehensive article. I understand some video and or audio clips go with it. So check it out. It really gets into what's wrong and what can be done to fix the duopoly here.
Yes, thank you. And David, that brings us on to a new article from you on Fornethy.
Of articles over the next 3 weeks on Fornethy. This one is on fire safety. It's called Reckless Endangerment. Now, what we discovered from old press cuttings is there was a fire started by the staff at Fornethy when it was a residential school. And this set light to the woodland roundabout. And the report reads 2 fire engines from Kirrimuir and Ailith attended, and assistance was summoned from Forfar and Dundee. So you had fire engines from 4 different towns. They used 6 jets to stop the blaze spreading, and it still took out 8 acres. But the report says the children at school, which is for those in need of a holiday, were elsewhere at the time on afternoon outings. Isn't that nice? Transpires, it's completely fallacious. The truth was, all the children were in the building. And we have here one of the Fornethy girls' recollections. She said, I remember it was a forest fire. I remember being in the house and everyone was talking about it. Mrs. Fletcher was there and telling us we might have to be sent home if the fires got worse. I remember feeling relief and hoping they would get worse so we could be sent home to my family. So what happened was they kept them locked down for the whole day and told, it would appear, the fire brigade that there was no one in the house, despite the fact it was surrounded by a burning forest. This is not the only case of reckless endangerment to do with fire safety. We go into others. And we ask at the end the question, it's not possible with these events for the authorities, Strathclyde Regional Council, as it was then, not to have been aware that there were problems. There must have been questions asked. And the question that we have is why in 30 years did no one intervene in what was happening at Fornethy, even when there was all these signs that it was being badly run, badly managed, and that the welfare of the children was being neglected.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.